Well, this is our last session together, apart from the video and dialogue. And I thought we should discuss the art of learning. There are two kinds of learning. One, which is cultivation of our memory, which contains information, knowledge, skills, and all the professional ability and so on, which we receive through our education, both formal and informal. That is the source of our thoughts, because thoughts are a response from memory. It also contains all our experiences, both pleasant and unpleasant. And we don't have much choice in that. It's a bit mysterious how the brain decides what to record and what to leave out. But this happens with all of us quite involuntarily, not as per our decision. And all that goes to constitute what we call our conditioning. So conditioning is essentially held in memory. It includes the biological conditioning, which is the instincts, then the cultural conditioning, which comes from our religion and our particular society in which we grow up, and also the particular conditioning of due to our own experiences, past experiences, both pleasurable and painful, joyous and sorrowful, all of which are recorded and held in memory. And then when we encounter a new situation, the senses record what is actually taking place. But in addition to the input from the senses, there is an input in consciousness from this memory of all similar experiences and whatever associations arise from this memory. And that is what we call the experience. It gets mixed up. The inputs from the senses are mixed up with the input from the brain, and that's what we call an experience. And the input from the brain is different for different people, because our education, our knowledge, our conditioning is different, because we grow up in different environments. So that part is clear. The accumulative learning, how it takes place. The other learning is non-accumulative. It comes from discernment of what is true and what is false, and could also be regarded as an unlearning process, because it's really the unlearning of the false. Now, as we said in previous talks, the conditioning that we acquire from childhood as we grow up contains some elements which are factual, which are healthy, which help us, and they also contain a lot of what one calls illusions, which are simply mental constructs which one has accepted from one's culture and which create a lot of disorder in consciousness, and one calls them as illusions. These can be learnt about, perceived and eliminated from consciousness, and this is the process of self-knowledge or learning about oneself, which is part of the religious quest. Now, the Buddha pointed out long ago that the disorder in our consciousness arises from such mental constructs which are illusory. They are not really part of nature. And therefore, the disorder in our consciousness has a cause, and that cause can be eliminated by perceiving what is true and what is false. Because when the false is seen to be false, it disappears. It's being just a mental construct, and if we don't approach life that way or don't accept that mental construct, then it just dissolves. So this is a different kind of learning which has not been sufficiently emphasized in education, and therefore often we are quite unaware that we are conditioned, and even more so, one is unaware that one has a lot of such illusions and what those illusions are in the mind. So that's the difficulty of this quest, because the person who has these illusions doesn't know that they are illusions and takes them to be facts. That is what it means, illusion. When we know that they are illusions like metaphors in poetry or fairy tales and so on, it is not really an illusion that creates any disorder, because we are aware that that's not reality. But when we take them to be reality and accept them, that they constitute illusions which produce disorder. So Krishnamurti said, disorder has a cause, and therefore disorder can be eliminated. But order has no cause, because there is tremendous order in nature. We talked about it on the first day when we looked at the scientific and religious quest, that science studies the order that is there in nature. So, since we are also products of nature, the question arises, why is there disorder in our consciousness? Is it a making of nature, or we create it through our own thinking? So nature gave us only the capacity to imagine, to remember and to think, the capacity for language, which all human beings have. And somewhere we use that to create disorder in our consciousness. So it's our own doing, and we can learn about that and learn not to create disorder in our consciousness. We also said that the disorder that we see in society is a projection of the disorder in our consciousness. Therefore, in a deep and fundamental sense, the change in society comes about only when there is the ending of disorder in our consciousness, so that then there is not the manifestation of violence and division and hatred and so on in our relationships, and therefore then also not in society, because society is made up of such relationships. So that's what is implied in freedom from conditioning. It's not absence of conditioning, but it is to examine one's conditioning and drop that which is false, especially that which produces disorder in consciousness. If it does not produce disorder in consciousness, it is not very sinister and you can leave it alone. So you don't have to examine everything that is there. But whenever there is disorder, one can learn where this disorder comes from within oneself and trace the illusion from which it arises. And if you can end that illusion by perceiving what is true, then you are free of that disorder. It ends. So this religious quest becomes a quest for the ending of disorder in consciousness, as all the negative emotions that we experience. And then one comes upon order, which is virtue in consciousness, and therefore it is the essence of religion, because the purpose of religion is to come upon virtue, not only in action, but more importantly in consciousness, the state of consciousness. So the next question that arises is, what is the nature of these illusions? And how do they produce disorder? And how can we learn about them? I won't touch the other learning because we have all been through that. We all know how knowledge is acquired and skills are acquired. So that's not really the subject matter of this seminar. Now there are illusions at various levels of our consciousness. At the very superficial level, they are what we call superstitions. So if you grow up as a Christian, right from childhood you are told that the number 13 is somehow a bad omen. And so if you are allotted seat number 13 in the plane or in the hotel, room number 13, you are somehow fearful and scared. Depending on how scared you are, you might go and want to change your seat or room. The Hindus have similar superstitions. If a cat crosses the road when you are driving, even I have seen professors who turn back their car because it's a bad omen. Whatever you are going for will not happen. It is a bad omen. Or you hear the crow early morning and then it's a bad omen. So all kinds of superstitions like that, which are really acquired simply by osmosis from one's surroundings in which one has grown. Those are the views prevailing in your society. They are nonsensical, they are false, but we don't know that they are false, and they produce a lot of fear. These are easy to get rid of because even scientific inquiry or intellectual inquiry can eliminate these rather superficial illusions. Then there is a large set of illusions which I would call cultural illusions. Depending on the particular culture in which you have grown, there are various values that we imbibe from that culture. And one identifies with those values, calls them as my culture, and that creates division from other people who identify with a different culture or a different set of values. So these so-called values or moral opinions about what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, itself also creates division among people, because there are communities which regard widow marriage as wrong, and there are other communities which accept them. There are communities which accept meat eating as right, and there are other communities which consider it wrong, and so on. So all that also creates division, particularly if one is attached to the particular values with one grows and then looks down on people who don't share those values. All the religious identification comes under this category, and when one has a concept about God which has been given by your particular religion, it can be different from the concept of God in another religion. We don't know if that concept is true, but we accept it. We call it our concept, we identify with it, and therefore we look down on people who have a different concept or who don't believe in God and are atheistic. Then we also dislike them. So it produces this like and dislike, it produces groupism and creates disorder and division. Similarly, you may grow up in a family where it was believed that children must be regularly punished, otherwise they get spoilt, and that they must be brought up with fear. For a long time that was believed, spare the rod and spoil the child kind of philosophy. All of 19th century was full of it. It's only in 20th century that children began to be respected, and I think it was Madame Montessori who was a pioneer in bringing about this change in education, that you must respect the child and not threaten him or discipline him through fear. So if one grows up with that, because one has experienced that in childhood and one has been brought up that way, one accepts that. And when one's own child misbehaves, that's what one imitates. The way I was treated by my parents, I imitate. And so in imitation and conformity, there is a continuity of that culture, including the continuity of all the discrimination and all the falsehoods in that culture. For thousands of years, men looked upon women in a particular way, not as equals, not as partners, not as friends, but as subordinates, as people who should be assisting men and who exist, whose purpose is to help the husband or the father to do what he wants to do, a sort of assistant. And this was accepted culturally, both in the West. A woman couldn't vote, a woman couldn't go outside and work, and so on. Marriages were arranged by the men, things like that. In different cultures, in different ways, but this kind of discrimination in the name of culture, in the name of morality, was practiced. In India, practices developed where women were burnt on the funeral pyre of cremation of the husband, because it was believed that marriages go from one life to the next life, and you may be disloyal to him after he has died, and so on. So it was considered, this practice of sati went on, and it was in the earlier 20th century that this was outlawed and seen. So for centuries this was accepted. Slavery was accepted. Kings and queens were accepted as agents of God, and the laws didn't apply to them. So all these were human constructs. They are not biological facts of nature. They were just became facts because in that culture those facts were accepted as norms and believed in. So the people who grow up with this are not aware that that's an illusion. They call it morality, they call it virtue. If you grow up in Saudi Arabia, it is violation of virtue for a woman to show her face to any man other than her husband, and so on. or her parents. So if one grows up with that, one begins to accept that. And they are not aware that that is illusion. They think that that is reality. That's because they see it as reality. Everybody else also is practicing. So it's a large gamut of cultural illusions. Subtler parts are in existence even today. The gross parts one may have freed oneself of in modern times. But what we regard as love is not really love. What we call religion is not real religion. What we call education is not the real meaning of education. So we live with all kinds of superficial meanings, and we are not aware that we are living with superficial meanings. We have never discovered the true, deeper meaning of these words. And that's what it means that you don't have wisdom, when you are accepting all kinds of superficial meanings of these words. So all that also constitutes illusion. Then there are, deeper still, there are psychological illusions, which psychologists call complexes. In childhood, you may have been beaten or threatened or terrorized, or you might have had very pleasurable experiences which you store in memory and you long for them to be repeated, and so on. So you develop all kinds of complexes which also then produce disorder in consciousness. Deeper still, the sages have pointed out that the feeling of being a separate individual, separate from the rest of the creation, and certainly separate from other people in society, is also an illusion. That actually we are all connected with each other, that we share the same consciousness. And Krishnamurti went to the extent of saying, not that the other person is your brother, but that the other person is yourself. So, our identification with our own body and our own mind, including all the conditioning, creates this feeling of being a separate self. It's not there in nature. This ego is not there in nature. It is there only in human consciousness. Trees don't have it. Mountains and rivers don't have it. In nature there may be disorder, in the sense there may be earthquakes and storms which are destructive for us, but that's not the definition of disorder. It is not what is inconvenient for us that constitutes disorder. But there is no intentionality in nature. When the storm comes or the cyclone comes, it is coming according to the laws of nature. It is not coming with the intention of destroying you. So sometimes nature is helpful to us and sometimes it is opposed to us. When it is opposed to us, that is not an indication of disorder. And this one understands. That's why in one's relationship with nature, it is relatively easier to accept the difficulties that nature creates. But when it's created by another human being, then it produces a feeling of enmity and so on, which is not the feeling you have when it is natural, like that. So the question, deeper question that arises is the ego also created by nature? Or is it a creation of my own thinking and my own assumptions? In which case it's an illusion, it's a mental construct, and it can be eliminated. Now the sages are saying that it is an illusion and it can be eliminated. The Buddha said it, Socrates said it, Krishnamurti has said it, and many other religious people have pointed that out and regard it as an illusion, which means it's a construct. The Buddha, after a lot of investigation into himself, said thinking exists, but the thinker is not found. Doesn't exist, it's a construct. And scientists now are looking at the brain and able to take photographs of the neurons which light up when there is sexual feeling or when one does mathematics, or the different regions of the brain which are involved in different emotions or different activities. And they find that there is no region of the brain corresponding to what one calls the ego, or there is no one part of the brain which controls all the other parts. So that you have now a scientific confirmation of Buddha's statement that the thinker or the ego is an illusion, it doesn't actually exist. So there are these illusions in one's mind, and from them all kinds of division, all kinds of violence, all kinds of negative emotions arise, and therefore one can eliminate them by eliminating the illusion. Now, the difficulty is that one doesn't know what those illusions are. One is taking those to be facts. So, how does one learn about it? What Krishnamurti pointed out was that every time you experience disorder in consciousness, it is very perceptible. Sorrow is perceptible, fear is perceptible, frustration and anger are perceptible. They are states which you are aware of and you know that, and they produce pain, psychological suffering for you. We have been taught to try to avoid these as painful things in life, either suppress them or escape from them. If you are bored, you go for entertainment, go to the television and so on, avoid boredom. But that maintains it, because what they are saying is that just as there is causation in nature, which science studies, there is causation in our consciousness or psyche. And that causation is that so long as that illusion exists, so long as I am approaching with that assumption, which is false, it will have this consequence and produce these disorderly states of consciousness. So the quest is for ending the disorder in consciousness, which is a quest for truth. Because when you perceive what is true and what is false, then the false ends. And you are freed of that corresponding disorder which arose out of that. And total freedom or total enlightenment is to eliminate all illusion from the mind, to be completely free, including all the way the ego process itself, to uproot the ego process within oneself. Now, it is not as if there is a sequence and that one must get rid of the superstitions first and then the cultural illusions, then the psychological illusions. This is just a way of describing the different illusions. But there is no sequence like that when you actually, so it's possible to get rid of any illusion at any moment of time, provided you have perceived the truth of that. So it needs an insight, and there is not a sequence in insight, because insights don't have a definite process which produces them. So what to do by way of learning? I don't know what the illusion is in my mind, but I perceive the disorder in my consciousness. And so that, if one is not busy manipulating that and trying to cope with that externally, then one looks for the inner causation. So Krishnamurti says, stay with it. It's a jewel. Whatever you are experiencing, the fear you are experiencing, the sorrow you are experiencing, don't run away from it, don't escape. Stay with it, watch it, and learn about it through watching it. Don't just avoid it. Of course, you have to be reasonable. If it is so great that you are getting killed, you have to act on it. So it doesn't mean that you should take this like a formula. But what he's saying is that if you want to learn about it, you mustn't avoid it. You must stay with it and watch it, and then you learn about it. So you'll have to go through that pain or discomfort of staying with these states with a learning mind. A learning mind is saying, I don't know the truth. So I'm going to watch out and see what is the illusion from which this feeling is arising within me. So it's an inwardly directed mind rather than an outwardly directed mind. I would like to give a few examples to illustrate this, because we have not been trained into this kind of learning. One can learn also, you don't have to learn from a teacher. If you have a learning mind, you can learn even from simple experiences, everyday experiences in your own life. Provided you are into this mode of inquiry and you value this kind of learning. You could even call it research into yourself. In a sense, it is research, but it's not just intellectual. So, as example, I would say, if you are walking down the road and you hit a stone and fall down, the normal reaction of a man is to get angry. Why did they not remove this? What is this? They left a stone in the middle of the road and now I have been hurt. You curse the municipality and you go to the doctor and get medicine for your pain and so on. That's all reaction. That's an external adjustment to that event. You have not learned anything about yourself in that process. But if you have this learning mind, if you have an inwardly directed mind, you ask yourself, Krishna, why didn't I notice this stone when I was walking on the road? And so, if you are honest and you are interested in this inquiry, it says, I wasn't watching the road. Why were you not watching the road when you were walking on the road? Well, because I was thinking of my work in the office, and this road I go every day, I can always watch it another time. It's not important. Therefore, I wasn't watching it. Why is it not important to watch the road and the trees and the birds when you are on the road? Why should you be thinking about your office at that time? Well, because I think that your work in the office is far more important. Why do I think that the work in the office is more important than walking on the road and watching the road? Well, because my promotion is connected with it. What my boss thinks about me and whether matters, because he may not give me leave or he may not promote me and so on. Why is it so important to have this good opinion of my boss to get that promotion? Well, because I get more money if I do that and I have more power. So, I have learned a lot about myself. That when I am ambitious and when I am concentrated and giving importance to my work in the office and wanting position and success, it also leads to being absent-minded on the road. It's not only on the road, but on your dining table, in your family. You have not time for your wife, for your child, because you are all the time thinking about your office and your work, and that becomes a constant worry which distracts you from being in the present. Now this is a big problem of human consciousness, that we can be absent from where we are. Mentally absent. I may be physically present, but I am mentally absent. The animal is not capable of it. But a human being, it can be in his thought world and not in the real world. So it takes us away from the present into either the past, I am ruminating over the past, or into the future. And this possibility of all the time living in the future or living in the past and therefore avoiding the present is something that has to be learned about. And if you get addicted to living too much into the future or too much into the past, it will take away from your life. Life is always in the present. So that's one of the problems, that we have this capacity, and we have to put this capacity in its right place. It's not as if this capacity itself is evil, but if I don't know where to put it, if there is too much of living in the past or too much of living in the future, then that imagination goes wrong. It creates disorder in consciousness or in my relationships and so on. Similarly, sexuality exists. It is there in plants, it is there in animals. It doesn't create any big problem for them. It's a reasonably regulated activity, regulated by nature and its laws. But in human beings, it becomes a source of great problem, because you have all this business of lust and rape and pornography and addiction and so on. And that takes you away. All the time your mind is then taken up in that. So this human consciousness has this problem of relationship with pleasure. What is my relationship with pleasure? Pleasure is there, not only sexual pleasure, pleasure of food, pleasure of various kinds is part of life. But how much pleasure, what is the right place of pleasure is not clear. So one can be pursuing pleasure and one gets into addictions and so on, and that creates problems. Or one may be arguing that pleasures are evil and should be avoided, and there are religious people who have practiced austerities and so on. That also distorts you from within. So how to find the right relationship with pleasure? So those things which are biological, then this inquiry requires learning about what is the right place in life of that. You will eat food. What is the right amount of food to eat? Overeating, undereating, both go wrong. So this, to put everything in its right place is order. And I don't know what that right place is. So I need to learn about it. So there are two kinds of inner learning. One is those things which are given to us by nature, to have what is my relationship with it, what is my right relationship with the body, including that. One has to learn about that. And plus these imaginary constructs which I now accept and which I call illusions. So those illusions which produce disorder in consciousness, to trace them